Good morning, everyone. If I could just have your attention for the next couple of minutes, please. Welcome to the hearing this morning, which is a Level 2 hearing. Under Level 2, the public gallery will be closed. Only a few accredited journalists will be allowed into the hearing room whilst evidence is being given at Level 2. Everyone else will be able to view the proceedings in the annex, subject to the 10-minute delay. No one, whether a member of a legal team, an accredited journalist, or members of the inquiry staff or contractors, will be permitted to bring an electronic device into the hearing room. This includes mobile phones and smartwatches, even if switched off. This is a direction of the chair, and breach of this direction is a criminal offence. The inquiry security team will be able to arrange safe storage of any such devices during Level 2 hearings. Please ask at security for further information. Finally, may I please ask you to remain in situ at the end of each session until the chair and witness have left the room. Thank you.
Ms. Whitelaw.
Good morning, sir. Mr. Bailey, my name is Francesca Whitelaw. As you know, I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Mr. Bailey, thank you for coming. Please sit down. The microphones will pick up what you say as long as you speak nice and distinctly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for attending to give evidence today. Could you give us your full name, please?
Yes, Nicholas Jack Bailey.
And you made a witness statement Do you have a copy of your witness statement in front of you?
No, I was told that if I needed it, it would be on the screen, so I didn't bring it in.
I will just get a copy for
Sorry.
you. And if we could just have a moment, sir, just to
Yes,
address on the matter. Thank you.
but it probably will be on the screen in places, Mr. Bailey, but I should have a copy.
Okay, sorry. I should
In
have
case you need it.
I should have brought it in.
No, you shouldn't have brought it at all. But it's not a bad idea to have it there just in case you need it.
Thank you.
And you can. What the rules are? Tell me what you can. Refresh your memory if you need to from the statement, but obviously you're not bound by it. It may be right, it may be wrong.
Thank you, sir. No. Thank you.
Just keep that to hand in case of need.
Thank you very much. So you should have a copy of your witness statement now in front of you, 24 pages, dated the 23rd of April 2018. The reference for the transcript is INQ 005130.
Yep.
Have you had an opportunity to look through that statement?
Yes, I have.
And are you content that the contents of it are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, I am.
So in this case, I'd ask permission only to adduce the first 14 pages of the witness statement up until the end of the first paragraph of page 14. The reason for this is I will deal in evidence today with Mr. Bailey the relevant parts of the remaining pages, but they otherwise contain personal details about home and family situation, which we don't require.
Right. All right. Yes. Adduce it, please, up to the end of the first paragraph on page 41. 14. 14.
Thank you. Mr. Bailey, if I could start then, please, with your role and professional background. So in March 2018, were you a detective sergeant with Wiltshire Police?
Yes, I was.
And had all your service been with Wiltshire Police?
Yes.
Do you recall when you joined?
December 2002.
And when had you been promoted to detective sergeant?
That's a good question. I believe it was 2016 or 2017. I can't be absolutely sure.
So a year or two before the events we're talking about?
Yes, so I was promoted to sergeant in 2015 and I went in to become a detective sergeant in 2017, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, before we move to the events of the 4th of March 2018, we know that you suffered Novichok poisoning as a result of those events and spent time in hospital being treated for and recovering from that. With that in mind, and also that we're talking about events more than 6 years ago, could you tell us how much you remember now of the events?
My recollection of the events in March 2018 are hazy at best. I spent a lot of time obviously dealing with it when it happened and dealing with the aftermath of it, processing it, and I got to a point where the only way for me to kind of move on from it was to stop thinking about it and to close it off. So it's been some time since I've actually had to then go back to those events. So yes, my memory of the incident isn't the best.
Well, we will go through the statement, and if you need to refresh your memory, please do.
Thank you.
Did you retire from the police in about 2020?
Yes.
So beginning then with the first paragraph of your statement, events of the Sunday the 4th of March 2018, what was your shift on that day?
I was working 2 p.m. till 11 p.m. that night.
Is that what's called a late shift?
Yes.
Do you recall now your call sign?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
I believe we have a record of it being 1772.
Oh, apologies. My collar number is 1772, but we had call signs.
Sorry, my
for the
mistake.
radio.
Yes, there are the two numbers.
Yes. Yeah.
So your collar number was 1772.
That's
Don't
correct.
remember now the call sign.
No.
And where were you working on that shift?
I was working in Bourne Hill offices in Salisbury.
Was that within the general CID office?
That's correct.
Can you just describe for us briefly the CID office at Bourne Hill Police Station?
The CID office, it was a council shared building. The police were primarily on the first floor of that building, and the CID themselves, when you walked through the door into the first floor, CID were generally on the right side and towards the back of the room, and the uniformed officers were on the left-hand side, towards the back of the room.
So council officers as well in that office,
Yes.
but you had a specific area for CID, did you?
That's correct.
And we've seen on a map with another officer, PC Collins, the location of the police station. Is it fair to say it's in the centre of Salisbury, not far from the Maltings?
That's correct.
And which other officers were on duty with you when you started your shift?
From my statement, I can see that DC Dawn Rowan and DC Jane Wilby were working with me. They were part of my team. I can't remember if there were any other people working with me on that shift.
Thank you. We'll come to individuals as we progress through the chronology. How was your attention drawn to the incident at the Maltings?
I remember a log being generated and coming in, which was a report of 2 unknown people collapsed on a bench, either semi-conscious or unconscious. I cannot remember whether I saw the log or if I heard people talking about it on the radio. I think it's probably the latter, that I heard people going to the scene, and it just piqued my interest a little bit because it was an unusual log to come in.
Well, perhaps if we could bring up that log, it's INQ 005981. The text on this is small, so we'll try to enlarge the relevant sections. So I'm advised there's a technical problem. We will need to have a short pause. I don't know whether you would prefer to wait a few moments.
Do you want me to go away,
rise
or can we do it while I'm sitting here? How are you getting on?
Perhaps,
Looks as if it would be easier for everybody if we didn't stay formal. I'll leave for a moment.
Thank you very much.
Stay there, would you, Mr. Bailey? Found it?
Thank you, sir, for your patience.
No, don't worry.
I understand there was a short technical glitch, which hopefully has been remedied.
Well done.
We are going to the log, which was at INQ 005981. As I said, the text is very small, so we'll bring up the sections we need to go to. First of all, do we see at the top left? Mr. Bailey, can you see that document in front of you? Storm log detail in the top left-hand corner.
Yes.
And then the log number, you recalled in your statement it was possibly ending 198, and indeed we can see the log number there ending 198. And further down, the Maltings as the location, the Maltings, Salisbury. And then caller unknown male, witness, partner of VN 004. Sir, this was the man on the phone that Seen Witnesses referred to, who telephoned the
Yes, they
emergency
did.
services. It's been an anonymised statement as the partner of VN 004, another witness. His statement is INQ 00, we won't go to it, 4957. It's a witness statement dated the 8th of March 2018. And so I'll adduce that witness statement into evidence, if I may, to complete the picture as to the calling of the ambulance.
He made the 999 call, did he? Right.
So if we could now go to page 10 of the log and bring up at 1617 the 999 call.
Yes.
Do we see there, perhaps if we can enlarge it even more, the 1617 999, partner of VN 004. Mr. Bailey, you may recall seeing logs during your police service. Does this look familiar, and does that indicate there that 999 call made at 1617?
Yes.
And then we see at 1618, just below, RP stating there is a male and female on a bench. The female is not responding, seems to be passed out. Transfer to W South from terminal. Westpole, W10, control, grade, immediate urban. Mr. Bailey, does that suggest to you the call was graded for immediate attendance?
That's what it looks like to me, yes.
And if we could go to the next page, page 11 of the log, and an entry 1618, the male is barely responding.
Yeah.
And then underneath that, ambulance being called now. 1619, female is completely unconscious. 1619, noted this is a medical tasking, ambulance to be called. Mr. Bailey, is that the log you think you might have seen?
Yes.
Well, you said you thought you had either seen it or heard people talking about it. Do you know which it was?
So, no, I can't say for sure whether it was the log that I was looking at, because I would have been working on my computer doing something unrelated. It was possibly that it was, I heard that over the radio.
Yep, got it.
If you did hear it on the radio, where we see there, for example, female completely unconscious, is that the sort of call out that you would hear, those words on the radio, or similar to that?
Yeah, similar to that, yeah.
And do we then see on the log uniformed officers being assigned to the call when it says at 1619, WS61 mobilised by drag drop? Do you know what that means, mobilised by drag drop?
From recollection, that means that a police unit, a police officer, was asked to attend and confirmed that they would attend the scene.
So we've been advised by Wiltshire Police that WS61 is the call sign for PC Alexandra Way, whom we know attended the scene. And then we see underneath 1619 WS63 mobilised. That was an officer, PC Stokes. And then WS65, that's PC Alex Collins, from whom we've heard.
From what we heard, yep.
We have heard oral evidence from PC Collins, who was the first officer on the scene, and we've received written evidence from PC Way, who also attended. We then have on the log WS14 monitoring log, a few entries down at 1620. Mr. Bailey, you may not recall the identity of WS14. We understand it's Sergeant Tracy Holloway. Would that accord with your memory of who was around at that time working on this incident?
Yes, that's correct.
And does that indicate there that she was monitoring the log at that time?
Yes.
At 1621, we have RP stated this was just outside of the Superdrug store. Was the Maltings an area you knew well?
Yes, fairly well.
And at 1624, WS65 at scene of incident, again that's PC Alex Collins. And at 1625, WS65, the same officer, saying there's an off-duty doctor at scene, believe that she has taken something. She is cut, and then it just cuts off there. So, Mr. Bailey, do you see from the log various units being recorded as at the scene at that time?
Yes.
Thank you. We're going to come back to the log in a minute, but for now, who were you aware of attending the incident?
I can recall, and I'm basing this off my statement, if that's okay.
So is it that you don't recall it now, but when you see the names in your statement, that refreshes your memory?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
You think that's right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, sorry, go on.
So Sergeant Tracy Holloway and PC Alex Collins was in my statement that I knew that were attending or had attended the scene.
So they were the uniformed officers
Yes.
who attended. And can you explain the difference between your role as a detective sergeant in CID and the response of uniformed officers?
So response uniformed officers, I would describe them as the bread and butter of policing. They are the officers that deal with everything. They are 24/7 emergency response, so they will attend emergencies or lesser priority incidents, whereas the CID weren't in uniform, and we would deal with serious and complex crime. So we wouldn't be responding necessarily to everything, but we would be monitoring and dealing with the incidents that needed that level of investigation.
You indicated that the log piqued your interest. Why was this log of interest to you?
Hearing or seeing two people either unconscious or semi-conscious in that way, I thought that could have been a medical emergency, but it also could have been something related to drugs. And I did think that at the time that if it was the latter and it became serious, that the CID would be involved anyway, so I would have rather have been involved with it from the start.
In your witness statement, we're still on page 1, you say it could, for instance, have been a bad batch of drugs or something similar. Now, the date of your witness statement is the 23rd of April, so a little time after the events. We know, of course, that you were in hospital prior to that. Do you recall now whether that's something that occurred to you at the time, so about the time you received the log, or do you think it was something that occurred to you later about potential bad batch?
No, it occurred to me at the time.
At the time of the log, or going to the scene, or on that day?
At the time of hearing about what had happened and becoming involved in it, I thought it could have been. That was a possibility, something to consider.
So while you were still at Bourne Hill Police Station, what initial contact did you have with any officer at the scene? And I'm moving to page 2 of your statement now.
Sorry, this is on double page, so I apologise.
Page 2, and halfway down, I think you're still at Bourne Hill Police Station at this stage.
Thank you, yes, I can see it now. Yes, I would have contacted PS Tracy Holloway over the radio, just to get an idea of what they were dealing with at the scene.
You say in your statement you contacted her or she contacted you. I can't remember which. Do you remember now?
No.
But one way or another, you had contact with Sergeant Holloway, who was at the scene. What was the nature of the conversation?
I can't recall the conversation now, but I would have we would have been in contact for me to get an idea of what was happening, so what they were faced with at the scene, and see if there's anything I could do to help, to be honest with you.
So I think you indicate in your statement there wasn't much more she could tell you at that point other than they were in a bad way. So not much more added than to the log.
Yes.
Is that right? Did Sergeant Holloway tell you, or were you aware from any other source of the identities of the casualties at that point?
No.
If we could go then back to page 12 of the log, INQ 005981, there's an entry at, it's highlighted already, 1654, thank you very much, 1772, CID, aware and en route. Was that you?
Yes.
So the log came in at about 1617 and it looks as though you were en route to the scene by 1654.
Yes.
With whom did you go to the scene?
DC Dawn Rowan.
And how did you get there?
We walked.
So it wasn't far. How long would that have taken you?
I would imagine less than 10 minutes.
And when you arrived, what did you see?
So when we arrived, we walked over the bridge where the library is towards the scene, and I believe there was cordon, there was police tape up and a police officer by the police tape before the bench. I'm sorry, please can I refer to my statement
Yes,
again
of course,
just to
we're
get
on
this
page
correct?
2. Who was that officer?
I believe it was PC Alex Collins.
Do you remember now speaking to PC Collins at the scene?
No.
So, in your statement, you say we went underneath the tape and spoke briefly to PC Alex Collins, who was stood near to the bench. So PC Collins was within the police tape, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what did you understand the purpose of that police tape to be?
To prevent members of the public from walking past the bench or going to the scene.
Is there a difference between police tape and a police cordon?
A police cordon, I would say, is the general term to secure a scene, but tape is used in order to secure that cordon, if that makes sense.
And what's meant by an inner and outer cordon?
An inner cordon would be, for instance, in this case, the bench would be the inner cordon, and you'd have a cordon around that area immediately, and an outer cordon would be pushed out further, depending on the location, the geography, and how you're able to do it.
So as a police officer, when you arrive at a scene and there's a cordon in place, how do you know whether you can go within it?
There would be police present to stop you from going through, and there would be police tape there to show that you can't come through.
And does it make a difference if it's a police fire or ambulance cordon?
I wouldn't say so, no.
So essentially, if there's police tape and there are police officers within it, you'd feel it was safe to go there. But if there were people stopping you or tape cordon and no one within it, you wouldn't. Is that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yes, of course.
I think that's what he said.
Yes, I'm just checking I've understood. So where were the casualties we now know to be the Skripals at the time you attended the scene?
They were not at the scene. As I understand it, they'd been taken away by paramedics to the hospital.
And what conversation did you have with Sergeant Holloway once you were there at the scene?
We discussed what they'd found again. Can I refer back to my statement, please?
Yes, of course. It's page 3, paragraph 2.
Yes, so my statement says that I spoke to Tracy, or we spoke to Tracy. And my statement says, I think it was mentioned that the two casualties may have had a drugs overdose. And she mentioned a particular drug name, but I can't recall that then, and I can't recall that now.
Do you know whether you'd heard of fentanyl at the time?
Yes, I would have known the name fentanyl at the time.
We've heard other officers speak about having had recent training on this. That's recent to March 18. Had you? Do you
No.
remember? No. Were you aware where that information, the suggestion that it may have been a drugs overdose, had come from?
No.
Did you know anything about the casualties at that stage, such as age, presentation, anything like that?
No.
And were some inquiries made of some homeless people living in the covered car park area near the Maltings?
Yes.
Do you recall what inquiries those were?
So I believe that one of the PCSOs had already spoken to them, but DC Rowan and myself decided to go and also go and speak to them. My statement says that we spoke to one person who didn't know what had happened, but suggested that he might have known who one of the casualties was.
So nothing to assist you in terms of the causes of the collapse?
No.
And were you aware by this time, and I'm on page 3, paragraph 5, of Sergei Skripal's name?
No.
Can I just take you to that paragraph, so page 3, paragraph 5. You say you weren't aware of Sergei Skripal's name, but in your statement you say, by this time I was aware that the collapsed man's name had been identified from a driving licence.
Yes.
You're aware his identity had been established, but you didn't know what it was at that point. Is that correct?
I think that's correct, yes.
And I think in addition you say identified from a driving licence, and the checks on his address had identified the car. I think it was a BMW. I do not remember the model, colour or registration plate, but I would have known it at the time.
Yes.
If we could go back to the log, please, INQ 005981 and page 11. Do we see that 1634? We don't know the identity of WZ62, but it says male is no trace, including year of birth search, transaction completed. What do you understand no trace to mean there?
I understand that to mean that on the police national computer, if somebody's not known or come into contact with the police before, they would not be shown on the police national computer.
I don't know whether you can help us with the entry below T code. There's a hash NE. Salisbury concern reason 1 at all.
Reason 1 you'd have to give a reason for doing a search of an individual on the police national computer. I can't remember what reason 1 would be, but that's what that would be. It would have to be recorded as this is why we're asking for that information.
Thank you. And then we have 1634, Skripal Sergei, 1951. So does that indicate that Sergei Skripal's name and date of birth had been identified by police at 1634?
Yes.
And the 1635, it says above is from WS61, that's PC 2727 Alexandra Way. So does that indicate that she probably identified that information?
Yes.
1636 on the log. Poll, last name Skripal, first name Sergei, date of birth redacted 1951, home address 47 Christie Miller Road. So the home address has been identified as well?
Yes.
Well, you'd got his driving licence, hadn't you? Or somebody had.
Somebody had said, yeah.
Did you yourself look for the car when you were also making inquiries around the car park area?
Yes.
And if we go to page 12 of the log, at 1658, there is a vehicle registered to his HA, we assume that's home address, and there's a registration there. Just below that, do we see the name Ms. Julia Skripal?
Yes.
And also a description of a BMW registered to Christie Miller Road, described as a red four-door saloon. And then at 16:59, if we can keep going in the log, NT niche for that name, what does that mean?
No trace on niche. So niche is the police system that Wiltshire were using, certainly at that time. And you can, for instance, do intelligence checks on people if they're known locally within Wiltshire. So that would mean there was no trace of that name on Wiltshire Police's system.
And then 1700, from insurance, Julia Skripal was slightly different spelling, redacted, 1984, and then 1701, WS14, the date of birth for female would fit the female we have here. So does it appear at this stage that both Sergei and Julia Skripal had been identified by name?
Yes.
And finally, 1718, WC06 is monitoring and has spoken to WS14. However, at this time, CID are currently at the scene. We know that WC06 is Inspector 1176 Martin Scorer and WS14 is Sergeant Tracy Holloway. Can we assume that CID here refers to you and PC Rowan?
Yes.
And do we see at 1721 an officer has gone to the home address to see if they can find the car, WS14, who's Sergeant Tracy Holloway, WS66, that's a PC David Jones, is going to the address to see if the car is there and to see if we can gather any before it cuts off. At page 13, please, of the log. At 1741, 2727, I think that's a shoulder name rather than a call sign name, is that correct?
Yes, that looks like a collar number or a shoulder number.
So PC Alexandra Way was PC 2727, and we see there it says 2727 has been informed this is fentanyl related, then this is suspected, not confirmed fentanyl, the male is coming round, female is cut off there. 1743, all persons that have been in contact with the female need to completely change their, I suspect it's uniform there. You've explained you discussed with Sergeant Holloway a potential drug and the possibility, you had in mind the possibility of a bad batch of drugs. Were you aware of this suggestion that if it was a particular drug, so here fentanyl, there might be a risk of contamination such that anyone who'd been in contact with at the scene would need to change their uniform?
I don't recall that, no.
Thank you. If we leave the log there and we'll return to your witness statement, page 3, paragraph 5, you say Dawn and I had been looking for the car, this car, and you refer to walking up the internal ramp to the upper parking area and not seeing it. Do you remember that now, going to look for the car?
Vaguely remember.
Do you know if you walked around the car park area or just stood at the top of the ramp?
No, I don't remember.
But in any event, you didn't see the car?
No.
Did you speak to Sergeant Holloway before you left the scene? Page 4, please.
Yes.
What did you have by way of conversation?
We had a brief conversation about her team remaining at the scene until it could be established, or we could establish more about what had happened to the two casualties, and about the address as well, and the fact that there was officers outside the home address of the Skripals. In my view, and my statement says in my view, that P.S. Holloway had everything under control and she had enough resources to manage the scene as well as the scene at the potential scene at the home address.
When you were at the scene of the bench, what, if anything, did you touch while you were there?
I don't believe I touched anything.
Were you close to the bench? At what distance were you?
2 to 3 metres away. I didn't get any closer than that to the bench.
And what consideration did you give to making inquiries of shops at the scene?
And directly outside, opposite the bench, not outside, opposite the bench, was, I think it was Superdrug, which in the window it showed that they had CCTV. However, the shop was shut. I think it shut at 4 o'clock because it was a Sunday. So it was a consideration that that would be a very good inquiry to make, but it's not something that we could do at that time.
How long do you think you spent at the scene before you left?
I think, well, my statement says a maximum of 40 minutes I would have been at the scene for.
And what conversation did you have with PC Collins before you left?
My statement says, I think it was the second time of talking to him that he told us it was suspected that the unconscious female may well be the unconscious man's daughter, and that she'd been identified from the car insurance and a date of birth.
And so did there then come a point when you returned to Bourne Hill Police Station?
Yes.
And were you contacted by Inspector Martin Scorer?
Yes, I was.
And what was his role?
He was, as far as I can remember, he was the duty inspector for the county.
So is that the most senior operational officer on duty at the time?
Yes.
And did he ultimately hand over to DI Mant?
Yes.
What conversation did you have with him? You refer to having a conversation on point to point. Just explain that for us.
Point to point, so the police radios, you can contact somebody directly using the radio, so that no other people can hear it, and so I would have, and we refer to that as point-to-pointing.
Is that a usual form of communication?
Yes.
And so, what did you discuss with him?
We would have. But my statement says I explained that Tracy had it all, had the scenes under control, and that he said that he was going to come to Bourne Hill when he'd finished doing other things that he was doing.
And did he do that? Did he then attend?
Yes.
A short time later, I think in your statement, about 20, 30 minutes later, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what conversation did you then have when he attended the police station?
We talked about the incident. We talked about the resources needed to maintain the scenes and to make sure that everything was being covered. And the cordons and the fact that the car had been located on the top of the Maltings car park.
And what about the home address? Did you discuss that?
Yes, we debated the house, and we were we were discussing what to do about it. At that point, and my statement says that we didn't have a confirmed crime. We didn't know what we were dealing with, so we didn't necessarily have police powers to just enter the house.
Were you aware at that stage that we've seen on the log it had been identified as 47 Christy Miller Road? But do you remember being aware of where the house was yourself?
Vaguely.
And with reference to paragraph 3 of page 5 of your witness statement, if you need to, could you tell us what initial agreement you reached with Inspector Scorer about dealing with the home address and why?
It transpired that a neighbour of the Scripples had a key because they would, I'm told, or we were told at the time, that they would quite often check on the cat or check the house or check on them. They had a key, and so because of this, we agreed that it would be worth asking that neighbour if they would enter the property. I believe some of the windows were open or not secured at 47 Christy Miller Road. So not knowing how long they would be in hospital for, it would be worth checking the house, securing it. And if the neighbour went in to do that with the key, we could escort, or a police officer could escort them as well.
So if I can understand the rationale at this point, at this stage you didn't know why the Skripals had collapsed. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
The working hypothesis was that it might be a drugs overdose from your perspective,
Or a medical emergency.
or a medical emergency. You didn't have evidence to support that at that stage,
No.
and you didn't have evidence that a crime may have been committed at that point,
That's correct.
but you'd identified the home address and that the Skripals lived there from a neighbour and from the driving licence we've seen.
Yes.
And you'd said the windows were open, so the property wasn't secure.
That's what I was told, that the windows were open.
So, and you didn't know how long the occupants were going to be in hospital at that point. And the neighbour had a key. So was the intention, as you've said then, that the neighbour would go in, but the police could escort rather than the police exercising powers to go into the property at that point?
That's correct.
And that would be an opportunity to survey, not search the property to see if anything was obviously awry.
Yes.
Was that your thinking and Inspector Scorer's thinking
Yes.
at that time? Did you have any reason at that point to believe there was a risk to the neighbour or the police in entering the property?
No.
And did you get as far as informing officers at the scene, at the address of this plan before the actions of DC Wilby intervened?
Yes.
So could you tell us what happened then?
After passing
So in
that
terms
message
of DC Wilby's intervening before that plan went ahead?
Yes. So having asked the police officer to go and arrange that with the neighbour, DC Wilby had searched the name Sergei Skripal on, I believe it to be Google, certainly on the internet, and she called me over because she'd found something was on the screen that she'd found from that search relating to Sergei Skripal.
Do you remember that now?
Yes.
So what do you remember her saying?
Something like, Sarge, you better come and see this, or similar words to that. It was quite an urgent, I found something, you need to see what I found.
Where was she in relation to you when that happened?
We would have been in the same area, a couple of desks away from me.
If we could go to INQ 004178, page 5. This is a transcript of a documentary dated 26th of December 21. Do you recall giving an interview or appearing on a programme called Secrets of the Skripal Poisoning?
Yes.
And is that date about right?
Yes.
It says there, Nick Bailey, so attributed to you, one of my uniformed colleagues had found a driver's licence, and on the driver's licence it said the name Sergei Skripal and gave a local Salisbury address. One of my team Googled Sergei Skripal's name. I remember vividly her saying, Sarge, you're going to need to come and see this. And I walked over and looked over her shoulder at the computer. And there was a picture of Sergei Skripal, and it was a newspaper headline. And it basically said that he was a former Russian spy who'd been released as part of some kind of international spy swap. That information changed everything. He was deemed to be a traitor to Russia. Is that what you recall now?
Yes. Sorry, in relation to recall the
So,
saying that
sorry,
in
that
21.
description, is that what you remember of what happened, or is there anything different that you recall now?
No, that's how I remember the incident.
So returning to your witness statement, we can take that down. Page 5, at the end of paragraph 3, you say, I recall reading that that's Sergei Skripal, had been imprisoned by Russia for 10 years for this and had only been released as part of some sort of swap between countries of prisoners. Do you recall whether you saw one article or more than one article about this?
I believe it was just the one article.
And what did you do when you learned about the article?
The first thing we did was to contact the officer that was going to be going into the address with the neighbour to stop them from doing that.
And how did that open source information affect your assessment of possible causes for the collapse?
It added another layer. We still didn't know at that point why they'd become unwell, but knowing or believing that he was linked to a spy swap, and the article said that he'd been allegedly spying on Russia, made the incident feel a bit more sinister to me. Certainly more suspicious.
If we could go to INQ 004615. Do we see there, this is a statement made by DC Jane Wilby, dated the 8th of March 2018.
Yes.
It's a short statement, so I'm going to read it out and then give you an opportunity to tell us if it accords with your recollection or if there's anything you'd like to say as to your memory of events. So she says, I am Detective Constable 1770 Wilby of Wiltshire Police, currently based within Salisbury CID. On Sunday the 4th of March 2018, I was on duty from 1400 hours until midnight. At approximately 16:15, I was aware of a report of a male and female who were unconscious on a park bench in Salisbury. I was aware of this as a result of a call made over the radio. I continued to monitor the updates given and was told sometime later that DS Bailey and DC Rowan were attending the scene. I was carrying out inquiries for another job and was not required. While DS Bailey and DC Rowan were at the scene, I continued to monitor the log covering this incident. I noted that the names given were Sergei Skripal and Yulia Skripal. I checked Niche, which is the Wiltshire Police's crime and intelligence recording system. There was no trace for either name or the address given. Later that evening, I was aware that uniform officers were carrying out checks at the home address given with no reply, and concerns had been raised with regards to if anyone else was in the address. I then carried out open source checks on my computer to try and ascertain if there were any other family members. I then located a Facebook page in Yulia's name. I was told that Sergeant Holloway had a photo of both people on her phone, which she showed to me. I checked the Facebook page for Yulia against the photo and believed this may have been her. I then carried out an open source internet check for Sergei. The first result was a Wikipedia entry which I did not read. The second and third results were reports from the Independent and Guardian newspapers. I cannot remember the exact headlines, but noted they mentioned the word Russian spy. I checked one of those reports. I cannot remember which one of these I looked at. I saw that the article had a photograph of a male that appeared to be in a court. I believe that the male pictured in the article was the same male I had seen photographed on PS Holloway's phone. I asked her again to see the photo, which she showed me. I then made her aware of the article and the photo. It was at this point that I alerted both DS Bailey and Inspector Scorer. So does that accord with your recollection of events?
Yes.
What did Inspector Scorer do in response to this information?
He would have contacted the control room to update them on that information.
And did you hear that conversation? I'm at last paragraph of page 5.
Yes, I did.
So can you tell us what he said?
My statement says that he contacted the control room and said a Russian spy has been poisoned.
And what was your reaction to that?
It's not something that I'd heard before, and it's not something I'd thought I'd ever hear again. It was a very bizarre incident.
So in your statement, you say, I remember thinking I'll never hear that phrase on a Wiltshire Police radio again.
Yeah.
What action was taken then to try and verify whether it was the same person in the articles as had collapsed?
The officers that had attended the scene and seen the two people on the bench were able to confirm from looking at the pictures in the articles that they were the same. It was the same person.
And with reference to page 6 of your statement, if you need to refresh your memory, could you tell us what happened next?
From Inspector Scorer informing control room of the information that we just found out, the control room basically restricted the storm log 198, so that only a limited people could see it, and that those people weren't us. So we weren't able to then to view the log.
And what did you do about that?
I believe I asked somebody or asked myself if that could be, we could be de-restricted, because we were trying to work on the incident, and we had inquiries that we wanted to be able to do, and we felt we needed access to the log to be able to do those.
You indicate in your statement you were trying to run golden hour inquiries. What are those?
Golden hour inquiries usually refer to like the first hour or few hours of an incident, where you've got the best opportunity to gather the evidence.
And so what were you and PC Rowan able to do at that point?
I asked Dawn Rowan to contact the intelligence development officers to start to see if they could build an intelligence picture on the people that were in hospital.
So where you say intelligence development officers, where were they? Were they part of Bourne Hill Police Station, or were they based elsewhere?
I can't recall. I don't think that they were at Bourne Hill. They may have been in the control room.
That's force intelligence development officers, is it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And what did you do then?
I was speaking with Sergeant Holloway and Inspector Scorer about the scenes, about the cordons, and trying to make sure that everything was covered within those. We'd also talked about the city centre CCTV, which certainly was at that time, that we didn't have access. We weren't able to get access to those recordings to be able to track anybody or see what had happened.
A couple of questions about that, please. The city centre CCTV, accepting it was 2018, arrangements may be different now. Wasn't there a way of accessing the CCTV urgently?
I don't know. I can't remember.
And did you have any thoughts at that time about whether the investigation was going to be kept within Wiltshire, or whether counter-terrorism police might become involved?
It's not something that I considered at that time.
And did you phone crime scene investigation at some point?
Yes, I did speak to the crime scene investigation just to basically give them the heads up, to let them know this was happening if they didn't already know, so they could start potentially planning a plan or a strategy for how they were going to deal with the scenes.
And where were they based? Do you know?
No, I think Melksham at that point, but I'm not 100% sure.
You say in your statement you think that was around, it was all about a bit of a whirlwind, but I recall phoning CSI around 7:30. Does that sound about right in terms of timings?
That's what my statement says. I couldn't tell you if that's the correct timing.
But obviously we were talking about the scene late afternoon, early evening, so are we now sort of later into the evening?
Yes.
I won't take you to it, but on the log there's an entry at 2027 which says PND has been requested by DS Bailey, PNC will complete. So what does that mean?
I'm really sorry, but I can't remember what P&D was or would have been.
Do you think it is checks that you're completing at that time to try and gather information?
Yeah. An educated guess would be it was police national database, yes. Maybe, but so much time's gone by now, I can't remember how that linked and how that worked, other than the PNC checks. We would do the PND checks. I can't help.
I just want to ask you briefly about other persons who became involved at this stage. Now, firstly, in your witness statement, I'm at page 6, paragraph 3. You say that Superintendent Tim Corner phoned. What was his role?
He was the on-call superintendent.
And what did Superintendent Corner tell you at that stage?
I remember having a conversation with him around the frustrations of not being able to view the storm log, and that we were trying to run locally this incident, but we didn't have access to it. And I believe I asked him if he would see if he could de-restrict that for us.
And what about in terms of who was going to be the SIO, the Senior Investigating Officer, for this investigation?
I was told by Superintendent Corner that DI Ben Mant would be attending.
So he was going to attend Bourne Hill?
Yes.
And did PC VN 005 attend at that point?
Yes.
We're going to hear from VN 005, but can you tell us very briefly what their role was?
VN 005 was a PC, but it was also a CBRN trained officer.
So chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear specific
Yes.
training. So what was the purpose of PCVN 005's attendance?
I imagine to support and to support DI Ben Mant's decision making around the possibility of a CBRN issue. So he could potentially, being trained, he could potentially make, a guide DI Mant with some decision making.
You indicate in your witness statement that a couple of hours after we'd stopped the officer going into 47 Christie Miller Road, you had a briefing that involved you, Inspector Scorer, Sergeant Holloway, PCs Way and Collins, and VN 005. Do you remember that now?
Vaguely, yes.
I'm not going to ask you to give any specific details of CBRN advice, but can I just ask you these questions? Was VN 005's role in the briefing and in the case at this stage to give CBRN specific advice?
Yes.
And did that include whether or not you should enter certain places?
Yes.
Scenes? And what protective measures you would need to take if you were going to enter a scene?
Yes.
And did those protective measures include what personal protective equipment you should wear?
Yes.
And did VN 005's advice also include any other precautionary actions you might need to take?
Yes.
You described discussing the Skripal's car. Could you just tell us about your concerns about the vehicle? And it's at paragraph 1 on page 7 if you need to refer to it.
It was a consideration that if this was a criminal offence against the Skripals, that the car there could have been a secondary device or something similar on the car, and so we had to consider how we managed the car and how we dealt, how we secured the car and checked it, bearing in mind that could have been something on the vehicle that could have been a secondary device or something.
So did you reach a conclusion about what to do about the car at that stage?
I think the decision was to leave it where it was for now.
So the next topic I'm going to move to will be the search of 47 Christie Miller Road. I'm conscious of the time and
Well, that's a natural break, isn't it?
Indeed.
Wise law. Can you bear a quarter of an hour break?
Yes.
Bailey? I dare say the rest can as well. 20 past 11, please.
All rise.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bailey, just before the break, we were talking about the meeting between you, Inspector Scorer, Sergeant Holloway, PCs Way and Collins, and VN 005. Did you also address at that meeting whether to search 47 Christie Miller Road?
Yes, we did discuss that.
If we could go to your witness statement on the screen now, please. INQ 005130, and this is page 7, paragraph 2. You say there, the house was a priority for us, and Inspector Mant felt it was a priority to enter the house under section 17(1)(e) PACE, that's the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, for life and limb, to ascertain whether there were further casualties or evidence of poisoning which might assist in Sergei and Yulia's treatment. Inspector Mant was clear that he was happy to do the search, and VN 005 and I said we would accompany him. We left the CPT officers in the office writing up their involvement in the incident. CPT, is that Community Police Team?
Yes.
We'll hear more evidence about this, including from Inspector Mant. But for now, from your perspective and recollection, who was responsible for the decision to search 47 Christie Miller Road?
That would have been DI Mant's decision as the senior investigating officer.
So that was within your meeting? That
Yes.
was the person you thought responsible. Could we now go to INQ 006163, page 10? This is a witness statement from a witness statement of Superintendent Corner, to whom you've referred previously. Am I right that Superintendent Corner wasn't at your meeting at the time?
That's correct, he wasn't there.
He says, throughout the period of this incident, I was concerned that the Skripal's house could have someone else located inside it who could have required medical attention. I felt that we needed to safely conduct a cursory search of the property to confirm the situation. I also considered the possibility of a suicide pact and evidence in the form of a suicide note that may be present in the property, together with any evidence of the cause of the casualties, incapacitation, such as drugs or poison. Any of these things could be of significant value to the investigation and be highly relevant to inform the treatment being provided to the patients by the hospital. I had delayed instigating investigations at the Skripal's address in the hope of greater clarity regarding the cause of their illness. However, as a result of consultations with the CBRN community and the lack of any further information from either the hospital or special branch, I felt I could delay no longer. At this stage, while I still did not know the cause of the Skripal's incapacitation, I was considerably relieved once the scientists had ruled out radiation poisoning and not suggested the likelihood of a nerve agent. I was also aware that in circumstances where hazardous materials were likely to be encountered, and considered utilising specialist fire brigade resources as this was the applicable procedure. However, the indications from the CBRN tactical advisor and that community was that a cursory search could safely be conducted as long as suitable protective equipment was used. The intention of the search was primarily to confirm there were no other casualties. However, additionally, there may be other physical evidence to support investigations and inform treatment. I therefore concluded that on balance, CID officers, supported by the CBRN tactical advisor, was the most effective solution in the circumstances that we faced. Unfortunately, this was a decision that I have had cause to regret, as it led to the subsequent contamination of my colleague, Detective Sergeant Bailey. In consideration of the legal authority to enter and search the premises, I took the view that this was provided by Section 17 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 as amended, under the provision regarding entry for the purpose of preserving life. At around 22:43 hours that evening, I then spoke to both Detective Inspector Ben Mant and Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey regarding my priority for the precautionary search of the Skripal's home address. I advised them to enter, look around for other persons, but not to search to any extent. I further advised them to ensure their own personal safety and to gown up. In other words, to wear the personal protective equipment as suggested in consultation with the CBRN tactical advisor. I do not now recall the specifics of this conversation. I relied on the expertise of the tactical advisor with regard to PPE to be worn by my officers. Do you, Mr. Bailey, recall the conversation mentioned with you? That's by Superintendent Corner.
No.
But does that part of the statement that I've read out accord with your recollection generally of what was discussed? Is there anything with which you disagree?
No, nothing that I disagree with.
Were you aware of Deputy Chief Constable Mills being involved in the decision to search the property?
No.
Could we please go back to the log now, INQ005981, page 18. And if we could highlight the section 0051, and it starts 1139 speaking to the SIO DI Ben Mant now, and then below that FIM contact from Superintendent Corner. This FIM Force Incident Manager.
Yes, I think so.
He has had several calls from CBRN and other specialists, and 1629, and then the next entry below, reaction to have been so prompt it would have had to be a large amount of radiation, and below that, appear to have occurred at this time, therefore it's suspected that this is some form of ingested. Then scenes are to be preserved overnight by officers, car to be recovered, and DI Mant has request. The house is to have a cursory search by officers suited up, arranged by DI Mant. 1139 we understand to be the Inspector David Stevenson, the Force Incident Manager at that time. But Mr. Bailey, does that accord with your recollection of timings of the decision to search the house? That is at just before 1 a.m.
Yes, I think so.
And we'll come to a document later suggesting attending the house may have been about 2:20. For now, does that sound right to you, sort of early hours of that morning?
Timings for me are quite difficult to better get that right for you, but yes, it sounds like it would be about right.
Did you then travel from Bourne Police Station to 47 Christie Miller Road?
Yes.
In what vehicle?
In a unmarked CID vehicle.
And I'm now at page 7 of your witness statement. What happened when you arrived at 47 Christie Miller Road?
We had got out of the car, we parked up, got out of the car, had a brief conversation with the officers that were at the address, at the scene. We put on the PPE.
Did you know the officers at the scene?
I believed one of the officers was called Ollie, but I'd never had dealings with him before, so I didn't know who he was. And there was another PC or PCSO that I didn't know.
Do you now know whether that was PC Ollie Bell?
Yes.
So you now know it was PC Ollie Bell?
Yes, that's correct.
And from which police officer did you obtain your PPE?
VN005, I believe, had the PPE.
And when did you put it on?
Shortly after arriving at the scene, which we did outside of the address.
Where were you? Do you remember when you put on your PPE? Outside the address, but where specifically?
On the driveway, I believe.
So was that near the front door?
Yes.
And did you put on you say in your statement, I can't remember what order I got dressed, but I put on a white hooded all-in-one forensic suit over the top of my clothes. I also put on disposable shoe covers, goggles, gloves, and a face mask. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Without providing details, could you confirm whether you were trained in how to put on and take off PPE?
I don't think so.
Where did you put items such as your wallet, warrant card, access card, watch and mobile phone?
All of those items were in the clothing that I was wearing prior to getting changed. So the forensic suit went over the top of my clothes, and those personal items were in my clothes, so underneath the forensic suit.
So, looking at your statement, the end of page 7, going on to page 8, you say I had my wallet in the back pocket of my trousers and I had my police warrant card and council access card in my lanyard around my neck. I had my watch on and also my personal and work mobile phones with me. My work phone I always keep in my front trouser pocket on the right-hand side, and my home phone I always keep in my left trouser pocket so I know which one is ringing. My pen and my blue book I'd left in the car. I don't know whether you recall that now. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds right.
Was there a further conversation between Inspector Mant, VN 005 and Ollie Bell before you entered the property?
Yes, we discussed the benefits of using a body-worn camera to film the search of the house, the entry and the search of the house.
Did you have anything to do with that discussion?
I don't believe I did.
And why was that?
I wasn't trained, firstly, in the use of the cameras, and I didn't have one on me anyway, so I left that discussion to other people.
So that would be something to ask Inspector Mant and VN 005.
Yes.
What interactions did you have with PC Ollie Bell?
I don't remember. My statement says that I possibly had very little interaction with Ollie Bell.
If you look at page 8 and the second paragraph, can you tell us what your recollection was nearer the time?
My statement says VN005 took the body-worn camera from Ollie. It says VN005 also borrowed a torch from Ollie, and I may have had the torch, but I cannot be sure.
Thank you. So, if I may, we'll adduce the statement of PC Oliver Bell dated the 15th of March 2018, which is INQ 004472. I'll read what he had to say about the torch, which may not take things very much further, but there is some detail. So he says, after this point, one officer mentions they don't have a torch or a body camera. One of the officers, I don't know who, as they are all dressed and covered up, asked if they could use my torch and body camera. I gave my torch over to one of the males with my right hand and placed it in one of his hands, I'm not sure which. On my right side breast chest area, I had my body camera clipped onto my tactical vest. I unclipped this using both hands. I believe I would have steadied the camera with my left hand and used my right hand to twist it and unclip it. I've then passed the camera to the same officer I have given the torch to using my right hand. I don't know what hand he took it from. And he also has a section dealing with later on, which we'll come to, but he says this is PC Ollie Bell. After the search, in the exact same place they had changed into the forensic suits, they gathered around and began to take off their suits. As they're taking their suits off, one of the officers, I think, places the torch and body camera I had lent him on a nearby small wall, only about 3 bricks high, near some flower beds. This wall was only metres away to my right as I was sitting in the driver's seat. As they came out of the address, I got out of the car. Moments later, I was handed the torch by someone. I used this to shine light onto them as they were getting changed out of the suits. Don't know if that helps you at all, but do you recall when you were getting changed, both in and out of your suits, someone holding a torch to provide light?
No.
So can you tell us who and in what order entered the property?
I believe my statement says that I opened the door, but it was possible that VN005 then entered in front of me.
Could you describe in as much detail as you can, and using page 8 if you need to refer to it, how you entered 47 Christie Miller Road?
We used the key that the neighbour had. That was present at the scene, I believe.
Sorry, who had that? You said present at the scene. Did someone who had the key?
I cannot remember who had the key. It would make sense for one of the officers who was guarding the address to have that key.
So you said we used the key. Was that you or another officer who had the key to enter the property?
I had the key. So my statement says that Inspector Mant did an introduction on the camera, and it was believed that the camera was being held by VN005, who's doing the filming. I unlocked the front door with the key, and my recollection as per the statement is that I unlocked the front door with the key in my left hand and opened the handle with my right hand, and it was a type of door where you'd actually have to pull the handle, push the handle down to open the door. My statement says I think the door was hinged on the right. I cannot recall if it opened inwards or outwards. I believe it was inwards. And then when I unlocked and opened the door, VN005 then entered.
And appreciating you may not have the detail that we have in the statement, do you have a memory of opening the door now?
No.
Not at all?
No.
Could we go to INQ 005819, page 88? That's the far right of the page and the bottom two photographs we have up on the screen now. Does that show the door handle?
That shows a door handle, yes.
But you don't actually remember the door looking at that picture now?
No.
Thank you. If we could take that down then. Again, if you need to refer to your statement, we're about halfway down of page 8. But can you tell us what happened after you opened the door and went inside?
So after opening the front door, there was an inner porch door, which was so the second door, which was ajar. All three of us went into the property. I switched the light on in the hallway, which I'm certain that it was on the wall next to the lounge door, and I think I also turned the light on in the lounge as well.
At the time of your statement, you were fairly certain you'd switched on the light in the hallway. Do you have a memory of that now?
No, not really.
So you say in your statement that you switched on the light in the hallway first, and then you said you think you turned on the light in the lounge too. After that?
We went around the house. I can't be sure if it was VN005 or I were turning the remaining lights on and off. I suspect we both may have turned lights on and off. I'm not sure. We then worked our way systematically through the house. I didn't do much talking on the footage, as I was conscious it would be clear if one person did the commentary.
Thank you. If we could go to a plan of 47 Christie Miller Road, which is at INQ 005819 on page 89. I don't know if you recall this. This is the layout of the downstairs of Christie Miller Road. In your statement, you indicate that you went through the two front doors, and there was a hallway. Do you see number 1 there on the plan?
Yes.
I don't know whether this helps you at all, does it, to recollect? Do you remember this layout at all?
I can only remember the kitchen being at the back. That's all I can remember. I can't remember the other rooms.
In that case, I'll just take you through that part of the statement. You said you went through, there was a hallway, then the stairs and the toilet. The lounge was off to the left. So I think we see that at 3. And then you've just described you do have a memory of the kitchen being at the back. So we see number 4 there. And you said you think you went into the lounge first. What were you checking for, and what, if anything, did you notice?
Well, we were checking for, firstly, to make sure there was nobody else in the house that needed medical attention. That was the primary role for going into the house. But whilst there, we were assessing to see whether there was anything that could kind of assist in establishing what had happened to the 2 Skripal.
Was there anything that helped you in terms of their collapse, or that you thought might, for example, when you went into the kitchen? My statement says that there was an empty packet of dry pasta on the worktop, and I thought this was interesting as I had been made aware that there was a vomit out by the bench where they had collapsed, which had pasta in it. Could you tell us, and it's set out at page 9, what items you physically touched in the downstairs of the house? We can take that down now, thank you.
My statement says that I seem to recall that I physically checked the rear door to the back garden, which was locked.
Before you get there, you say there was a bin in the kitchen. You think you were the one who physically opened it.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Do you remember that now?
Well, it says it in my statement, so
So you don't remember now?
I don't remember doing it now.
At the time?
My statement says that that's what I did.
And then you've indicated that you seem to recall physically checking the door to the back garden, but even at the time of your statement, you said you couldn't be certain, but you were made aware that it was locked.
Yeah.
And what else did you actually touch in the downstairs of the property?
I believe it was only light switches and perhaps some paperwork.
We'll go now, please, to INQ 005690 and page 17. This is an extract from an interview conducted with you shortly before the date of the witness statement, 18th of April 2018. There's a section here where the interviewer says, OK, so in the house then, can we just be, what can you actually most certainly remember touching? And you say there, the only things I can remember touching was paperwork in that little study. It was on the desk. I remember flicking through it. It's the only thing I remember touching, and the light switches. And the light switch is OK, and everything else, says the interviewer. You said I would have, I'm sure I would have done, I dare say I would have done, but I can't remember doing it. If I'd opened a cupboard, I may have opened a cupboard door in the room we assumed was hers. That's referring to Julia Skripal. there was a wardrobe. I think it was a mirrored wardrobe. I can't remember if it was sliding or not. So there in your interview, much closer to the time, again indicating, as your statement does, that the only thing you could be fairly sure of was that you touched the paperwork and the light switches.
Yes.
Moving then to the upstairs of the property, and if we could just look at the plan of that, it's INQ 005819, page 90. So that's a plan of the upstairs, and even at the time of your witness statement, you couldn't really remember the layout, but you described 3 bedrooms that we see there, one thought to be Sturgess Skripal's, one Julia's, and a third spare room, as well as a bathroom and an airing cupboard. Again, by reference to your statement, if you need it, what items did you touch, and in what rooms upstairs?
My statement says I remember checking the bathroom cabinet for medication. I don't think I touched anything else upstairs.
Thank you. We can take that down. When you were inside Christie Miller Road, do you have any recollection of your goggles becoming steamed up so that you had to raise or lower them?
Yeah, I do have a vague recollection of not being able to see very well because of the goggles.
So you have a recollection of not being able to see very well because of the goggles. Do you mean because they were steamed up or for another reason?
Sorry, yes, because they were steaming up.
And does that recollection include you moving the goggles?
Yes, yes, I think I would have adjusted them because I couldn't see.
Are you able to say where in Christie Miller Road, upstairs, downstairs, or what room?
No.
When you left the property, and we're moving to page 10 now, what happened to the house key and the torch?
The house key would have been returned to the officer at the scene, which I believe to be PC Ollie Bell. And the torch, I don't recall much about the torch, I'm afraid, so I can't recall how that got back to its owner.
If we could go to INQ 005263. And this is an email from VN005, from whom we'll hear, to Nikki Davey. Is that a detective inspector in CID?
Yes.
And VN005 appears to be giving a timeline of events. If we could go to page 3, please. And at the bottom of the page, VN005 seems to be giving an account of going to the search about 2:20 a.m. And the section I'm looking towards the bottom of the page says, in the house there was no sign of disturbance and no sign of any suspicious substances. NB then held the torch as I undressed and bagged up my PPE, and I sealed the bag with a numbered seal. Nick then gave the officer his torch back. Does that help your recollection at all?
No.
But do you have any reason to think that VN005's account recollection might be wrong?
No, not at all.
Did you touch the camera that Inspector Mant had been using to film entry at any point?
I don't believe so.
We can take that document down, thank you. Do you recall how you dekitted?
I I can't remember the order in which I dekitted. It's likely that I would have taken off the forensic suit first, or the shoes first and the forensic suit. But I can't say the order in which I did it.
So in your statement, you say that VN005 had already prepared one large clear SPR bag for us to dekit into.
Yes.
And then I'm not sure what order I dekitted in. It would make sense that I removed my goggles and face mask, then my full suit, shoe covers, and then gloves, but I cannot be sure. So is that the same now, that you don't remember, you can't be sure, but you think that's a logical order?
Yeah, that's right.
How many pairs of gloves were you wearing?
At least one. I can't remember if I had 2 pairs on.
Thank you. We're going to move now to what you did after you left Christie Miller Road. Do you remember what you did first, where you went next?
We went back to Bourne Hill, the police station first.
How did you get there?
I drove back. I drove the car that we'd gone to Christie Miller Road and back to Bourne Hill, where VN005 exhibited the forensic clothing, the PPE that we had worn at the address. And then the next task was that D.I. Mant and I went to Salisbury District Hospital because D.I. Mant wanted to speak to the consultant looking after the Skripals.
And was that in the same or different vehicle from the one you travelled back from Christie Miller Road in?
My statement says it was a different vehicle. I can't recall.
So you said Inspector Mant wanted to speak to the consultant about the casualties.
Yes.
So did he do that when you arrived at the hospital?
Yes.
You say in your statement, Inspector Mant spoke to the consultant, which I think was Dr. Cockcroft. Do you have any recollection of the detail of that conversation now?
No.
And did you speak to anyone else?
I spoke to a sister on the Radnor ward because I wanted the possibility of obtaining some blood samples from both Yulia and Sergei.
And what, if anything, were you intending to do with those samples?
Well, we would be seizing them as evidence so we could potentially have them checked to see if there was anything in those samples that indicated why they'd become ill.
So you weren't intending to send them off immediately for analysis, but you were going to keep them in case you needed to do that.
It was a consideration that we would do either immediately or a later inquiry.
And did you obtain those samples effectively there and then?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did you yourself touch or handle at the hospital?
So my statement says I was handed 2 vials of blood and 2 vials of urine that had been taken from the casualties already. The nurse handed these to me in one sealed bag, and they were the vials were labelled with the patient's name. And Inspector Mant and I agreed that it would be best to separate the blood and the urine into separate bags. And so I was sat at a desk in the hospital and opened the bags and put the blood samples into one bag, sealed them, and then the urine samples into another bag and sealed them.
Did you put gloves on to do that?
Yes.
And then what did you do with those gloves afterwards?
I can't see it in my statement, and I can't remember what I did with the gloves unless it says it in my
I
statement.
think it's halfway down page 11. You say the gloves and plastic protection stripped from the seal were disposed of at the hospital.
Thank you, yes.
Where did you go after the hospital?
We returned to Bourne Hill and then to start writing a report and gathering what we'd done and putting it together.
So did you do that on a laptop
Yes.
that was yours?
Yes.
And what did you do with the samples?
I would have booked them into the fridge in the special property store at Bourne Hill.
Where was that special property store?
I believe it was down in the bottom, like almost like not the basement, but ground floor level of the building.
And then after you dealt with those samples, taken them to the special property room and written your statement, what did you do next?
My statement.
Sorry, you refer to writing a production and continuity statement.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Yes, that for the exhibits that
Yes.
I booked in. I know that we were writing a handover for what had happened and what we knew, and I recall deciding to book the items that were seized from the bench from the scene into the property store.
Can I ask you, you've described having vague recollections at Christie Miller Road. Do you have recollections now of going to the hospital, being at the hospital, or are you entirely dependent on your statement?
No, I have a vague recollection of going to the hospital. I don't remember who I spoke to and what was said, but I remember attending.
Thank you. And then if I can ask you, when you're back at Bourne Hill, do you have a recollection now of dealing with these exhibits or anything else while you were at Bourne Hill after the hospital?
Now I don't remember doing it, but I know that I did do it.
Do you remember being there at Bourne Hill, though, after the hospital?
Yes.
So referring to your statement then, and we are on page 12, you indicate that you dealt with some exhibits, double-bagged clothing for each of the casualties and the bag of sick. Where did you get those from and where did you take them to?
They were, all those exhibits were in the back of a marked police vehicle, which was outside by the back door of Bourne Hill. So I removed them from the boot, I think it would have been, of the car.
Were they all sealed exhibits?
I believe so.
You refer to the outer seal of the vomit bag coming loose. Do you have any recollection of that?
No, I can see it in my statement. I don't remember that now. But yeah, on the booking in the vomit, I noticed that the outer bag seal had become loose.
And did you wear gloves or any other PPE when handling those exhibits?
I can't recall. I would have likely worn gloves, but I can't recall.
In your statement, you say you didn't wear gloves. Do you think?
I didn't.
Yes, page 12.
Okay, well, in which case that's
likely to be
my best
more accurate,
recollection
is it?
of that.
In your witness statement, and we're at page 13 now, you say someone had taken photocopies of the contents of the wallet, that's Sergei Skripal's wallet, and placed them in the investigative file prior to bagging. Inspector Mant was then made aware of a card with a telephone number on it from the wallet. He was a little cross this hadn't been brought to his attention earlier. Can you help us with when you say was made aware? Is that something you noticed and told him or someone else, or do you not know?
I can't recall.
So we've heard a business card was found which identified Sergei Skripal's mobile phone number. Were you aware of that being that card?
No, I didn't know it was a business card. Just a card with a telephone number on it.
So is it right to understand that while at Bourne Hill on this occasion you worked in the CID office at the CID desk and went down to the SPR store, which was in the sort of basement area? Is that right?
That's right.
Did you go anywhere else at that time?
I don't think so.
You say in your statement you went to the kitchen, but you don't specifically remember doing this after you'd been to Christie Miller Road. And you went to the unisex toilets, which are next to the kitchen, all on the same floor as the CID desk area. So is that likely to have been your best recollection?
That's likely to be my best recollection.
When did you first begin to feel any symptoms of being unwell?
That evening, I think I felt sweaty, and I remember checking. I remember going to the bathroom and checking in the mirror, and my eyes were like pinpricks, or they were very small.
Sorry.
Well, you're about to ask. Go on. Where? Which building?
In Bourne-Hill.
At Bourne-Hill.
Yeah.
So when I asked you about the timing, you said that evening, but of course we've heard the search at Christie Miller Road being the early hours. But this is a long shift for you. Do you mean in the middle of the night by this stage?
Yes, it would have been well into the middle of the night.
Can you tell us anything else about how you felt at that stage then, while you were at Bourne-Hill Police Station?
No, I just, well, my statement says I had cold, sweaty forehead. I put that down to being tired and it being quite a stressful shift.
At the time, you said you had a vague recollection of speaking to Tracy, that's Tracy Holloway, about this, but didn't think a great deal more about it and put it down to tiredness. Was that your initial reaction?
Yes.
And you also say, and it's page 13, I was aware that Ollie from the scene at Christie Miller had also complained of having constricted pupils and had gone to A&E to get checked out. Do you know whether you started to feel unwell before you found out about Ollie going to A&E or afterwards?
I can't say.
Could we go to INQ 005689, page 22? This is from a portion of an interview with you on the 11th of April 2018. And the highlighted section. Now, during my time at Bourne-Hill, towards the end of the night, I remember being sweaty. I remember having a cold, sweaty forehead, which is very, very unusual for me because I don't get ill. And I remember whilst we were there, towards the end of the night, Ollie had contacted Tracy and said that something was wrong with his eye, and they suggested that he go up to A&E. Are you able to tell at all approximately what time that was?
No.
Thank you. Going back to your statement then, you say at page 13, I did not feel right and cannot recall leaving Bourne-Hill or driving home in my own car. I arrived home and you say that was about 6:45 a.m. Are you able to tell us how long it was before you drove home that you started to feel ill at all?
Best guess, a couple of hours before going home.
Do you have a recollection now of driving home?
No.
I'm not going to ask you for the detail in your witness statement about your home or your interactions with your family, but I'd be grateful if you could just summarise for us, by reference to pages 14 onwards, how your symptoms progressed. And if I can help you with that, first of all, sticking with page 14, how did you feel when you first got home after that long shift? What did you do? Were you able to sleep?
Yes, I felt, I remember I was very tired. So I'm just trying to find out my statement.
So page 14 is, the end of page 13 is where you drive home at about 6:45 a.m. and then you arrive home, so it's from there onwards.
Yeah. Sorry, are you asking me?
When you got home, how you felt when you got home and whether you were able to go to sleep once you got home?
I did eventually go to sleep once I got home, yes.
And were you woken up by, I think, missed calls from Detective Sergeant Kerry Laws and also a call from DI Nikki Davey?
Yes.
If we could go to INQ 004922, This is an officer report of Detective Inspector Nikki Davey, in which, giving an account of the Monday the 5th of March, she says Nick was woken by me at about midday to ask for some clarity about exhibits and how they were stored. The call was brief, as I was aware that he had worked all night and I'd woken him. Does that timing sound about right if you got home sort of before 7-ish,
Yes.
had a sleep, woken up about midday?
Yes.
And how did you feel when you woke up? And we're on page 15 now. You'll see the reference to the calls at the top of the page.
Yes. My statement says my forehead and the back of my neck were feeling very sweaty, and so I had a shower.
Did there come a point when you decided to go to hospital?
Yes.
And in your statement, you've indicated that that was prior to your children coming home from school. So if we can orient ourselves in terms of timing, if you had the call at 12 and school finish time perhaps mid-late afternoon, does that
Yes.
help you with?
I would have. I decided that I wasn't feeling right, and I was, because of what I'd been dealing with the night before, I thought it would be sensible to go to hospital.
And how did you get to hospital?
I drove.
Were you on your own driving to hospital on that
Yes.
occasion? Yes. And in your statement, you indicate that you arrived at about 4:12 in the afternoon.
Okay.
16:12, page 16, that is. And at the top of page 16, what happened when you went to hospital on that occasion?
I went into A&E. I explained who I was and where I'd been the night before and how I was feeling. I was seen very quickly in a side room by a member of staff, a nurse, I believe it was, who checked my blood pressure, temperature, heart rate, I think, I can't remember for sure, and effectively gave me the all clear, said everything seemed to be normal, but just obviously be aware and to keep an eye on it.
And in your statement, you say you were home again by 5 o'clock.
It was a very, very fastest time I've ever had in A&E.
And how did you feel overnight at home?
Overnight, is it overnight?
Yes.
Okay, so having gone to bed, I don't recall what time I went to bed, but overnight, I would describe it as getting a lot worse. I was incredibly hot. I was sweating. And my statement says that I went down around 5 in the morning, or between 5 and 5:30 in the morning, because I was freaking out a little bit, and my vision was impaired in that once I turned the lights on, it's very difficult to describe it, but everything was crystal clear and it was juddering as opposed to being smooth motion of looking around. Everything was, it's almost in frames and juddering, which was quite scary.
So you indicate in your statement that you had a bizarre night. I felt on edge. I'm not sure if I slept at all. You say I felt really weird, absolutely dripping with sweat. And then eventually the alarm went off for your wife, and I told her I wasn't feeling well. I felt like I'd been awake all night. And then you say, and you've just described, my vision was distorted. And then did you call for assistance that next day from your parents?
Yes.
Page 17 now.
Yeah, my wife was due to go to work. She initially wanted to stay, and I said it would be fine. But I needed my parents to come, and I didn't feel like I could drive my daughter to school, because I just didn't feel well enough. So I asked my parents to come over and help.
And was that, had they arrived by the time you were sick? As in vomiting rather than feeling unwell? If you look at your statement on page 17, it's the last paragraph.
My statement says that I vomited when they arrived.
If we could go to INQ 004178. This is another extract from the documentary we referred to earlier, the transcript of the secrets of the Skripal poisoning, and this is a section that's attributed to you. Tuesday night, that's when things started to change for me. They were like nightmares or hallucinations, like pure heat and flames, like right in front of my eyes if you were able to get close enough to the surface of the sun. It's like a tsunami of pure heat and fire. That was terrifying. When I woke up, I was boiling hot. I was literally pouring with sweat, just pouring with sweat. And I got out of bed, staggered downstairs because I needed to get a drink of water, and I felt really, really unsteady on my feet, and my vision was impaired. It was like still frames that were juddering from to the next. That's how my eyesight was, and it was horrible. I looked in the mirror again, and my pupils were still tiny, and I was scared physically by how I was feeling. It was terrifying, so I went to hospital, to A&E. That was the first time I met James, and was that the consultant James Haslam?
Yes.
From whom we've heard. Is that still a good description, in your words, of how you felt, or is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's the best description I can give.
And when you attended hospital, you indicate, and it's page 18 of your statement, that you were sick for a second time, mostly bile, bit of blood in the vomit. What did the hospital tell you when you got there on that occasion?
Once I'd been seen
By the consultant?
by the consultants, that I had a nerve agent in my system.
And did they tell you anything about your symptoms and the similarity of your symptoms to the Skripals?
They said that my symptoms were similar to that of the people that had been that were already in hospital.
And was this after they'd taken blood test results?
I don't know.
Because in your statement, I think you said they'd found the same substance in my blood.
Okay, yes.
How long were you in hospital for?
2.5 weeks, I think it was.
Were you discharged on the 22nd of March?
Yes.
I'm not going to go into any more details with you, but is it fair to say the poisoning had a very significant mental and physical impact on you? Thank you. If we could just go to INQ 005130, page 22. So this is from the witness statement, but it is also a direct copy and paste from the clinical discharge summary sheet, which we also have at INQ 004631. I'll just read through this. Upon leaving the hospital, I was given a copy of my discharge summary, which states the following. Admission date, 6th of March 2018. Discharge date.
I mean, I'm slightly concerned, Ms. Whitehall, whether it's really necessary to ask Mr. Bailey to relive all this
Yes, of course.
any more than he has to.
This is the very end of my questioning. We have the statement
We
there.
can certainly put this document in.
Yes, well, thank you. And we have the actual discharge statement.
Well, there we are.
But I was just going to end by saying thank you very much. I know it's been very difficult for you. There may be some questions, a few. Thank you.
Yeah. Have you some questions, Mr.
So
Straw?
just very briefly, sir, if I
Yes.
may. Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Bailey, my name is Adam Straw, and I ask questions on behalf of the family and partner of Dawn Sturgess. I'd just very briefly like to ask you, please, about your search of Christie Miller Road, 47 Christie Miller Road. To Miss Whitelaw, you mentioned that when you were inside Christie Miller Road, inside the Skripal house, you think you adjusted your goggles because you'd been unable to see.
Yes.
Can you explain any more about how you did that?
I can't recall it clearly, but the goggles would have been the type that you would, because they were steamed up, that I would have just adjusted them with one or both hands to help clear, maybe get some air in and clear it. Or use my hand to wipe the inside of the lens. I don't know, but that's what I would have likely done, but I can't say for certain that's what I did do.
Sure.
Yeah. Might have wiped the inside of the goggles.
Yes, so.
And To do that, would you have used your hand to lift the goggles, or how would you have done that?
Possibly, yeah.
And in doing that, might your gloved hand have come into contact with the skin of your face?
Quite possibly.
Or by the sound of it, the inside of the goggles. Yeah.
Moving then to the point you leave the address again. Who closed the door, the front door of the house? If you can't remember, don't worry, I can take you to the point in your statement.
Please do.
Okay. Can we have please 5130 up on screen? And it's page 9 of your witness statement, please. It's right at the bottom paragraph. You say there, we then left the house turning off the lights prior to leaving. I think I was last out, having still got possession of the key. I locked the door. Do you see that?
Yes, I do see that, yeah.
Do you have any recollection now of that?
I don't have any recollection of leaving and closing the door, but I know my statement said I had the key, so it would make sense that I would have locked the door, certainly, if not being the last person out. I don't know.
You mentioned earlier that when you went in, it was one of those doors that you had to turn the handle in order to open it. Can you help us? Was the same the case when you left? In order to lock the door, do you remember whether you had to touch the handle in order to close the door?
Yes, I can't remember locking the door because it's such a normal thing to do in normal circumstances, but it was the type of handle that it was quite possible you had to hold the handle and pull it up in order to then lock it with a key. But again, I can't recall doing that.
Do you remember what you did with the door key afterwards?
I think I would have handed it back to the officer at the address, outside the address, PC Bell, I believe.
Can we have on screen, please, 5689, page 17? This is the interview, a transcript of an interview that Miss Whitelaw took you to earlier, that you gave shortly after the event. Could you zoom in, please, on the middle of that page? There's a line that starts, I locked the front door. So it's about 8 lines down on that, and to the right-hand side of the page, I locked the front door. Can you see that?
Yes.
I assume I gave the key back to the officer that had given it to me, but I can't be 100% sure of that, but I'm fairly certain I gave the key back to him, because I'm sure he was the one who gave me the key in the first place, because if he was staying at the scene, he would have the key, so it just made sense, because I didn't want it, because I'd lose it. Is that accurate?
Yes. It's my accurate, the best memory I have of that, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Straw.
So, well, that concludes Mr. Bailey's evidence, and
Yep.
indeed, perhaps we could break for an early lunch to enable changeover.
Yes, I'm sure we can do that. Mr. Bailey, I'm very conscious you've had to relive a fairly nasty experience, but it was necessary, and thank you for doing it.
Thank you, sir.
There's no need to stay, and of course you're free to watch if you want in the future, but there's you have no further obligation to us here. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, 1:20 then, please.
All rise.